6 years ago, I did one of the first reviews of the Corefix dot and dab wall fixing, and today I'm back because there's a new player on the market, the Fischer DDF. I'm going to be pitting these two against each other with a bit of a guest appearance from the Rigifix fixing and using this equipment to see which one comes out top. And the reason I care or know about these things, well, I used to fit curtains and blinds for a living. So what's this all about? Well, as you may know, plasterboard is brittle. And some of the worst fixings around rely on the strength of the plasterboard alone to secure heavy things to the wall. So when you are securing something heavy, if there's no brickwork behind, I've done a video on the strongest fixings that create an anchor behind the plasterboard, a link's on screen now. But in an ideal world, you want to rely not on the plasterboard, but on the brick beneath for your fixing. But the catch with this is most plasterboard walls in modern houses are attached to the wall either by stud-work, plasterboard adhesive dot and dab to the wall, or expanding foam adhesive like I used here in our kitchen. And what that does is it leaves a small gap between the plasterboard and the brickwork behind. And if you try and screw into that brickwork, you're going to bow the plasterboard. And that's where the Corefix and the DDF come in, because what they're attempting to do is to bridge that gap to stop this happening. I bought 2 packs of 4 to keep things simple. Let's do a quick comparison to see what we've got. So the Corefix has a 95mm wall plug, the trademark steel core, and a 100mm screw. And this pack of 4 is £6 on Amazon, so £1.50 each. Not particularly cheap, but remember, you're generally using these for heavy duty situations. Meanwhile, the Fischer's plug is 100mm and the bolt is also slightly longer at 110. Unlike the Corefix, we have got a wing that opens up.
Ooh, what? There's a wing? Now, I've got to say, this is one of the most confusing things for me about this product. Because when I first saw this, I imagined, as I'm sure a lot of you would, that this wing was to brace the fixing behind the plasterboard. But it's not. Because if you look at that, there's clearly a gap between the top of the wing and the back of the plasterboard. They say in the product data for this that the wing is to brace the fixing in the brickwork, presumably to stop it rotating. But why do you need that when you've already got these fins on the collar itself? For me, it's almost as if the R&D designed this wing to brace the back of the plasterboard, but then they realised that with varying voids behind plasterboard, this was a flawed design because, of course, the brickwork will at various points get in the way of that wing opening. But we've done all this work on it, so we'll leave it in anyway. But some of you will be saying, but you haven't got your 3mm plaster skim on the surface. Well, we'll be having a look later on as to whether this makes any difference to how that wing operates at the back of the plasterboard. I wonder why the plastic shaft is detachable from the rest of the fixing. Makes it a bit tricky to remove. Pack of 4 sets you back £5.31 or £1.32 each. Slightly cheaper than the Corefix. But this bolt does worry me because, whilst it would be fine for TV brackets, things like that, this screw ain't going to fit in your typical curtain bracket, whereas the Corefix goes straight through. The design of the collar end, at any rate, of the Fischer is suspiciously similar to the Corefix, and they've also copied Corefix's maximum offset of 45mm from the front of the board to the brickwork behind. Oh, and both fixings require a 10mm drill bit. So let's get on with the testing. I've screwed a standard piece of plasterboard to the aircrete block in our garage. This stuff is so soft that the garage door lock scratched a groove right the way across it. So if the fixings can work in this, they can work in anything. And we've got a 20mm void behind the plasterboard. And first up, it's the Corefix. 10mm bit with the hammer action turned off. We are quite close to the top, and this might affect the strength of the plasterboard, but I wanted you to see what was going on behind. Fixing into the hole. I mean, look, you can see already the flex in that. So if this prevents any flex, it will be a minor miracle. And if you don't like that collar being proud of the surface, just start off gently with a 16mm spade bit before you drill the hole so you can rebate the plug a couple of millimetres into the plaster. Steel core. And we're going to put another fixing in below to support the bottom of the curtain pole bracket.
At this point, I'm just going to loosely screw these into position. I don't want to tension anything at this point. And I want to double check that we haven't got any flex on the board. Yeah. And I'll set my digital torque wrench to 1 Nm or Newton meter of torque. And time to tighten these screws up. Okay, so that's triggered. That's 1 Newton meter, and at the moment there's no flex on that board. Let's go to 1.5. Okay, that's just triggered bottom screw. Now that's tight. So that's 1.5 Newton meters of torque and no obvious bearing in the plasterboard. Now, if I was fitting a curtain pole now in this wall, I'd be really happy with that, and I'd probably leave that where it is. Now we need to probably carry on a bit just to see how far we can get this before it starts bowing in. And then later on we can do some load tests. But it feels really sturdy, that does. So this is a 1mm glazing packer. And I up the torque alarm to 1.75 Newton meters. So that's breached 1.75 and still can't quite get a 1mm glazing packer in. So I upped it to 2 Nm. Okay, we're showing 2.13 now. Let's just push that in at the sides. It's starting to bow back now. You can almost get that 1mm packer in. Probably if we go up to 2.25. That, to my mind, is the maximum I think we... That's 2.4 Newton meters. I think that is about the limit of where we should be pushing that to. Because with any fixing, particularly given this is an aircrete block, you can overdo it. The alarm's still going off. That was peaking at 3 there. And if we look at the wall, we can definitely get the 1mm packer in and a 2mm. We can't get a 3mm in. So it's basically 2mm of flex, which on your average wall in the house, you're not really going to notice. And I have pushed that further than it wants to go. Let's see what weight this fixing can take. Ready? So that's just over 40 kilograms of force. The bracket's bent, but there's no damage to the plasterboard. It's worth pointing out, this is a curtain bracket we use a lot for hanging sort of blacksmith style poles. It's a decent bracket, we've never had one fail, so that just shows you how capable this fixing is. So I put a much heavier duty pelmet bracket up in its place, reusing the same wall plug. And this time I couldn't tighten the screw. It's not ideal rescrewing into an existing plug. So you have to be careful reusing fixings, particularly in such a soft brick. But even with the screw not tightening, the fixing was able to take just under 80 kilograms of force without the plug pulling out of the wall or the plasterboard failing. So I thought I'd do a final test with a much longer bracket to increase the cantilever force. No need for the Torx driver this time, just my manual screwdriver to tighten the screw as tight as I dared. And this time the fixing failed with a cantilever force of just over 45 kilograms being applied. But to be fair, Corefix do state that the fixing shouldn't be used with cantilever force. Curious though, I thought I'd rerun the cantilever test in a brick wall of my living room to see if it performed better in a brick substrate. Similar torque on the screw, and we got another 15 kilograms out of it, just over 60, before the top plug slightly pulled out. It was time to move on to the Fischer DDF. A new piece of plasterboard and the screws in as similar as possible position to those in the previous test. Now the first thing I've got to do is drill out that bracket, which is a pain. Okay, so I'm not a big fan of the chunkiness of this, but I am properly in love with Torx bits, so that is a big plus. And it's in with that fixing. Check there's no flex on the board before we start. Yep, same as the last one. So, modified bracket. In it goes. Interestingly, this plug slipped into the wall probably easier than the Corefix, but I think the Fischer has superior compression on the at the business end, so we'll see how we get on.
The noise the impact driver was making suggests a superior plug compression in the wall with this fixing, although how much of that torque goes into the wing being pushed out, which is irrelevant to the strength of the fixing, I don't know. And a quick look behind shows you those, I think, massively underutilised wings. If Fischer had made these to brace the back of the board, they'd have had an awesome product. But more on that bracing point in a minute.
Right, I sort of instinctively know this is going to be performing well on the torque challenge, so I'm going to immediately start this at 3 Newton meters. The alarm's already going off. That's reasonably tight, can do with a bit more, so I'm going to up that to 3.5. Let the alarm go off. Okay, well that is very impressive indeed. So we've hit 3.5, verging on 4 actually. Looking at the flex of the board, there's not even a millimetre there at the moment. You can see there's just a tiny bit of flex on the board. Let's see if we can go any further. I'm going up to 4 Newton meters now. And that's actually showing 4.3.
And in the end I got it to just below 5 Nm of torque with, again, no flex to speak of in the board. Still couldn't get that 1mm packer behind it. And predictably the first bracket failed with no sign of any damage to the plasterboard, and with the second bracket, again the fixing happily withstood over 80 kilograms of cantilever force without pulling out of the wall. But a word of caution, the strength of that bolt in the fixing is such that you do have to be careful not to over tighten the bolt so that it pulls the plasterboard back to that wing, because when I did this it distorted the plasterboard horribly, as you can see here. And again, I repeated that final test with the cantilever bracket, and this time the DDF withstood an impressive 120 kilograms before failing or pulling out of the wall. Now, Fischer haven't even suggested that that wing is there to brace the back of the plasterboard, but this review wouldn't be complete unless I put a 3mm skim on the surface, which I've represented here with a 3mm glazing packer. I tried actual plaster, but it was, well, problematic. And you can't deny that it is touching the back of the plasterboard in this situation. But you just can't rely on this, because the depth of your void and the softness or hardness of your bricks will alter the extent to which that wing opens up. And as you can see here, there is still a little bit of give in the plasterboard. And on that last point, I thought I'd try it in the same living room brick wall, and to my surprise we've got both a gap at the back and the plasterboard is bowing quite considerably. But it is so nearly a really clever design. Okay, so let's have a look at that Rigifix.
And why mention Rigifix? Well, quite simply because on previous videos that I've done on dot and dab fixings, you guys have said to me, don't forget about Rigifix. So I was intrigued to give them a go in today's video.
Now, I bought mine on Amazon, clearly from a reseller, as they just literally arrived in this bag. If you want formal packaging and instructions, get them from here. There'll be links in the description. It's about £1.80 per fixing, including delivery. But it's quite interesting. 12mm bit, had to really hunt around for one of those. Similar size collar to the other two, but overall the chunkiest plug of the 3. I'll repeat that test we did earlier, nice and close to the top. Just so you can see what's happening behind the plasterboard.
But we're going straight to the heavy duty bracket this time. Again, that presses in. But this time with another chunky Torx bit, we're driving the inner metal core into the fixing.
At this point I got a bit excited and gave the plasterboard a push, and of course it slightly disintegrated, because I forgot the fundamental point about all of the fixings in today's video. They are not meant to brace the plasterboard, they're meant to support whatever it is you're fixing through the fixing into the brickwork behind. So I re-drilled both holes just to make the test fair.
But what I really like now is these M6, they also do M8 bolts. That's all you're going to see at the front, which I think is a really clever design.
Although this bolt did not fit in the original hole that I hadn't enlarged.
Right, torque test is irrelevant for this fixing.
Wrong, Charlie. I can't see anything about this on the datasheet, but you'll have noticed I only left the inner metal core flush
with the surface collar, and when I ran the cantilever weight test, the fixing failed at just under 60 kilograms.
Oh.
So I re-drilled the holes and this time drove the metal core right in until it would go no further, achieving a torque of over 5 Nm and presumably achieving greater compression inside the aircrete, with no noticeable bowing of the plasterboard, and this time the Rigifix withstood 90 kilograms of cantilever force before the top fixing slightly popped out of the plasterboard. In the interest of completeness, I thought I'd put the Rigifix through the same test as the other two fixings with that reinforced white bracket. Like the other two fixings, it didn't budge, and in fact the stronger bracket started to fail with no noticeable pull-out of the fixing or damage to the plasterboard. So that's it for today, and it's left me wondering what conclusions you can possibly draw from all that, particularly given when I started today's video, I didn't know where it was going to go and what I was going to find out. I wasn't surprised by the performance of the Corefix with the sheer force of that white bracket, because I've fitted some pretty heavy things with it in the past, like this curtain pelmet and radiators. And they're made in the UK, if that's of any relevance to your decision making. But I was admittedly impressed with the other two under the cantilever force test. I am though a bit bemused by those Fischer DDF wings. Yes, they braced the back of the board to a degree, but how necessary is that when the board remained intact in so many of the weight tests? Although if you're worried about your plasterboard, you can always pipe some expanding foam into the hole. Wait for that to set and you'll have a lovely firm base for one of these three fixings. We have a bit of a joke about this stuff on the Discord forum. If in doubt, foam it, but it is brilliant. And when buying a fixing for your mirror, TV, curtain or radiator bracket, don't forget to factor in the practicality of whether that fixing will work with these bolts. Because whilst obviously the Corefix screw is nice and thin, that Fischer DDF bolt is chunky. And whilst TV brackets are designed for this sort of thing, you might struggle with your mirror, radiator or curtain bracket. So that's really it. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions from those tests I did earlier on, and possibly leave your comments in the comments section below. And you'll also find in the description below the video details of all the fixings I've used today and where you can get them. And finally, if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. See you soon.